Hello, everyone, and welcome. The World Bank has pointed out something pretty stark. A huge reason many development projects don't hit their targets is because of poor project management. It's a tough reality. But what if I told you there's a powerful way to make sure your projects create real, measurable change? Well, that tool is monitoring and evaluation. I'm your MEL trainer, and I've spent years in the field putting this into practice. Today, we're going to break it all down. So let's dive right in.
This is the big question, right? It doesn't matter if you're working for an NGO, a humanitarian program, or in the public sector. You have to know if all the hard work is actually making a difference. The answer, you guessed it, is in monitoring and evaluation, or M&E. It's the framework that lets us track our progress, learn as we go, and most importantly, prove our impact. So, to make sure this all makes sense, here's the game plan for our session. We're going to start with the absolute core concepts. Then we'll walk through the three main phases of the M&E process. And finally, we'll talk about your role in all with this and how you can get started in this field. All right, let's start with the basics. Honestly, the easiest way to think about M&E is to imagine it's your project's GPS. It tells you exactly where you are, where you're trying to go, and if you're taking the best route to get there. First up is monitoring. Think of this as the part of the journey where you're constantly glancing at the GPS. It's that continuous, systematic check-in. You're collecting data all the time to see if you're on track to meet your goals. It's like your GPS saying, yep, keep going, you're on schedule to reach your next milestone. Now, evaluation, that's a bit different. It doesn't happen every second. It happens at key moments, maybe halfway through a project or at the very end. To stick with our GPS analogy, evaluation is like when you've reached your destination. You step out of the car and ask the really big questions. Okay, did we actually get to the right place? Was this the best way to get here? And did our trip actually solve the problem we had in the first place? So, to put it super simply, monitoring asks, are we doing things right? It's all about the process, and it's happening constantly. Evaluation, on the other hand, asks, did we do the right thing? It's about the overall impact, and it happens periodically. And trust me, you absolutely need both for a project to succeed.
Now, you're going to hear the term MEAL a lot. That's because we've added two really important letters, A for accountability and L for learning. Accountability is huge. It means we're responsible to the people and communities we're serving. And learning? That means we don't just file away our reports. We use what we find to adapt and get better, not just for this project, but for all the ones that come next. This is what turns simple data into real, meaningful action.
Okay, on to phase one. Before you can track your journey, you need a map, right? That's what this is all about. It's the planning stage, where you design your project's roadmap. Getting this right is absolutely the foundation for everything else. And this planning phase follows a really logical sequence. First, you have to understand the problem you're trying to solve with a needs analysis. Then, you design the project itself, mapping out your theory of change, which is basically the how your actions will lead to the desired change. And finally, you set your targets using what we call SMART indicators. See? Each step just builds right on top of the last one. So, it all starts with the why. You have to understand the problem inside and out before you even think about a solution. Let's make this real. For the rest of this session, we'll use an example, a youth literacy program. A proper needs analysis would mean going into the community, looking at school data, and actually talking to students, parents, and teachers to figure out why reading scores are low. So once you have your plan, you need to know what success actually looks like. That's where SMART indicators come in. A huge mistake beginners make is setting a vague goal, something like improve literacy. What does that even mean? A SMART indicator makes it totally concrete. It's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. This example is perfect. We know we want to increase reading scores by 15% for 100 students, and we want to do it in 6 months. It's crystal clear. Okay, so you've got a solid plan and clear targets. Now it's time for phase two, where we get our hands dirty and start gathering the facts. This is where your beautiful plan meets the real world, and you start collecting the data that's going to tell you if it's actually working. And there are so many ways to gather data. You'll probably use a mix of these. For our literacy program, we might use surveys to get quick feedback from a lot of students. But then we'd also do interviews with teachers to get those deeper, richer stories. And of course, a pre- and post-assessment of reading skills is perfect for measuring that change over time. Now, I want to pause here for something that is completely non-negotiable: ethics. I remember a project I worked on years ago where we were trying to assess a new farming technique. Our first survey was way too technical and just didn't translate to the local context. We had to stop everything, sit down with community leaders, and totally redesign our questions to be respectful and understandable. If we hadn't, our data would have been useless, and worse, we would have broken trust. It always comes back to consent, confidentiality, and treating people with respect. So you've done the work. You have spreadsheets full of numbers, pages of interview notes, and stacks of assessment scores. Now for the really fun part, finding the story inside all of that data. Phase 3 is all about analysis, where we turn those raw facts into powerful insights. Data analysis is really just the process of making sense of everything you've gathered. You'll clean it up, organize it, and then start looking for patterns and trends. This is how you figure out what's going well, what isn't, and most importantly, why. And a simple chart like this can tell a whole story. For our literacy program, this is what the analysis might look like. And wow, right away you can see it. The average reading score jumped from 45% to 62%. That is clear, compelling evidence that the program is having a real positive impact. The last step here is to share that story effectively. A good M&E report isn't just a data dump. It walks the reader through the whole journey. It explains the program's impact, shares what you learned along the way, and gives clear, actionable recommendations to your funders, your managers, and your community partners. Okay, let's bring this home in our final section by talking about you. We've gone through the whole process, but what does it actually look like to be a meal professional day in and day out? As a meal officer, you're pretty much the conductor of this entire orchestra. You're there from the very beginning to the very end. You'll design the M&E plans, create the surveys, and then, and this is so important, you'll train the data collectors, the enumerators on the ground. You equip them to do their job well and ethically. After that, you're the one analyzing the data, creating those compelling charts, writing up the reports, and leading the learning sessions so your whole team can grow. It's an incredibly dynamic role. And look, if you're just starting out, please don't be intimidated. You don't have to be a statistics wizard on day one. Honestly, the most important things you can bring are a deep sense of curiosity, a sharp eye for detail, and a real passion for using evidence to make the world a better place. So if you remember anything, remember this simple 4-step cycle. You plan your work with a great design. You act by going out and collecting the data. You analyze that data to find the story, and then you adapt by using those insights to learn and improve. Plan, act, analyze, adapt. That cycle is the engine that drives every effective project. And here are just a few practical tips to get you going. Definitely get comfortable with tools like Excel and data collection platforms like Kobo Toolbox. Always, and I mean always, put ethics first. Remember that your number one accountability is to the communities you serve. And finally, just stay curious. Never stop learning. At the end of the day, M&E isn't just about data and reports. It's about telling the story of a project's journey. And more importantly, the story of the people it's meant to serve. The data reveals challenges, progress, and impact. So the question I want to leave you with is, what story will you help tell? Thank you so much for joining me today. If this was helpful, please subscribe for more practical MEL training just like this.